If you watched football last weekend, you probably saw this play almost exactly as midnight was hitting on the East Coast for the new year. Ohio State attempted a game-winning field goal that would have sent them to the national championship game, and they would have also knocked off the number 1 seed Georgia Bulldogs. There's one problem, though. Kicking is not easy. In other sports, the players who score the most points are almost always the stars of the team and the league. That's why for your average athlete, starting formula if you want to win an MVP award is efficient scoring. Hit a lot of home runs, make a lot of three-pointers, score a lot of goals. Just be an efficient scorer, and that's a good starting formula. But in football, it's a little bit different. The top scorer for every team is almost always an afterthought. Nobody even knows who the top scorer in the league usually is. We go by things like passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, instead of actually points scored. And that's a big reason why the top scorer is an afterthought. If we look at the NFL, for example, top scorers in the league this season, 2022 season, there's only 3 non-kickers in the top 30. Eckler, Adams, Williams. But if we sort by points per game, there's only 1 non-kicker in the top 36. Remember, there's only 32 NFL teams, all of which usually only employ 1 healthy field goal kicker. When we look at the all-time leading scorers in NFL history, the first non-kicker comes in at number 42, and it's Jerry Rice. And Jerry Rice is the all-time leader in nearly every statistical category related to receiving. So it's pretty impressive when we look at the scoring that there are all these players that we just overlook who are the leading scorers in the league, who are, above almost every other offensive player that we consider to be a big threat on the field. So why does the kicker get forgotten? Why does almost nobody care about their impact on the game when it comes to scoring? And why are they always scapegoated? Well, for starters, it doesn't help that kickers look really easy to pick on. They're usually the smallest players on the team. They don't need to really work out the same way that offensive linemen, defensive linemen, wide receivers would. They don't need to have huge muscles. They don't need to look like DK Metcalf to just drive their leg through the ball and put it through the uprights. So, yeah, it's kind of easy for fans to look at the kickers and see the scrawny guy on the field compared to everybody else. And, that's the guy that's easy to pick on. It's for that reason that, the kicker is kind of like the nerd in the class for the NFL. They'll let him do their homework. He can score all of his points, but as soon as he, messes up, they're not going to invite him to the lunch table, basically. They're not going to actually be friends with this guy. If he messes up, someone's got to pay for it, right? The next reason why kickers catch so much blame is that football has extremely niche positions, and the kicker is probably the most specialized. The kickers, the punters, the long snappers are the most specialized out of those niche positions. So it's the you have one job argument. But this is only really part of the equation because a lot of players only have one job on any given play. Offensive linemen usually have one job. They're blocking one player, protecting the quarterback, those types of things. But the difference is that the kicker doesn't really play most of the game. An offensive lineman would be playing almost every snap on offense, as long as they don't get injured. So that's the difference, is the kicker is really only coming on the field a couple plays out of the game. So that's also why they catch a lot of blame for this. You don't see them very often. When you do see them and they're messing up, it's really obvious because, he's the one guy kicking the ball. And it's really easy to scapegoat that guy. So the entire time that the offense is driving into opponent's territory, the kicker's just standing on the sideline, right? He's not actually involved in any of the decision-making of when he gets to kick, where he gets to kick from, unless they're scoring a touchdown and it's the PAT. So even in that event, the kicker hasn't really done anything to score the touchdown, so it's why it's really easy to blame them. They're not actually the guy out there, that's really making any of the decisions, but they're making the final decision, which is the kick. Um, so I know I just compared the kicker to the nerd in the class, but in this case, they're also kind of like a politician. They're not really making all of these decisions, but they are going to get blamed for these things when they do go wrong. The final reason why kickers get scapegoated is partly just their own fault. It's mostly due to the evolution of the position. Kickers have gotten too good. We expect too much from them. In the early days of football, a kicker was just a guy already on the team. It's just like, hey, who here is the best at kicking this ball through the uprights? They just line up and just be toe punching the ball. Who's the best? We'll just have you be the kicker. All right, you're just the kicker. But the NFL eventually realized that specializing the position was a good idea because, you can make all these substitutions. Why not just have some guy who's really good at kicking? He can just stand on the sideline, and then when it comes time to score some points with this kicking thing, we'll just have him come on the field and do it. So that's actually what started to happen. One of the best early kickers was Lou Groza. He's in the Hall of Fame. He played from 1946 to 1967. So a pretty long time ago. He was one of the first specialists in the league, like as a kicker, but he was also an offensive tackle. So he was 6'3", 250 pounds as a kicker. And he was so good for his time that in his first 3 seasons, he set multiple single-season NFL records for kicking. Accuracy, distance, field goals made. But those marks would go unbeaten until kickers became, a really big specialist commodity in the 70s. So Groza actually won MVP in 1954 for his kicking, which is kind of unbelievable. And by today's standards, he would pretty much suck. When we look at his stats, they're terrible by today's standards, but he's a pioneer for his time. His career-long kick, 52 yards. And we groan today when kickers miss from 50. It's completely expected that that kick should usually go in, maybe about 70% of the time. But Groza's career field goal percentage was 57.8. which is now 155th all-time in NFL history. For context, Blair Walsh, a kicker who was laughed out of the league for his inaccuracy, for choking against the Seahawks in the playoffs for the Vikings, missing a very short kick in a game where he actually scored most of his team's points, by the way, but he was laughed out of the league for his inaccuracy. He sits at 44th all-time with a career percentage of 82. Now remember, Groza, who won MVP for his kicking, his career percentage is 57.8, so about 25% better is Blair Walsh, a guy who was, laughed out of the league. The all-time leader in kicking percentage right now is Justin Tucker at 90.5%. He's the only one above 90%. But this means that the probability of Justin Tucker making any field goal that he attempts is about the same as Steph Curry hitting a free throw. And Justin Tucker's attempting this from all across the field. When you attempt a free throw in basketball, it's from the same spot every single time, so inherently easier. The second place all-time kicker right now is Younghoe Koo. He's also an active player. He's at 88.8%, and he was actually out of the NFL for 2 whole years. He played in his rookie season for the Chargers, and the Chargers started 0-4, partly because he missed one of his game-winning field goal attempts, but he went 3 for 6 in field goals in those first 4 games, and the Chargers ended up cutting him, which is seen as a scapegoating move. They cut him for their 0-4 start and replaced him with a more experienced player, and then Koo was out of the NFL for 2 whole seasons, but when he actually came back, he was really good. And now the Falcons, the team that he's on right now, have signed him to a 5-year, $25 million contract. And remember, this is a guy who is currently second all-time in field goal percentage. He was cut in his rookie season, and all 32 NFL teams passed on him for about 2 seasons before he came back. It's important that fans realize this problem in the philosophy of evaluating kickers. A guy like Koo is nearly the best kicker in NFL history when looking at percentage, and he was completely passed on by all the teams in the league because he missed 3 kicks in his rookie season. The best teams don't need their kicker to constantly bail them out in order to win. It's certainly a great luxury to have a kicker that can make almost all of their kicks like Justin Tucker, but if a kicker bailing you out is the only way that your team can succeed, it's evident of other problems on the team, which goes back to the point that I made earlier about the kicker just kind of standing on the sideline while the rest of the team is doing a lot of the work. And this goes both ways, so you can't really blame the kicker when they're not on the field that much. They aren't really impacting the game as much as you would think, even though they're doing a lot of scoring. It's kind of 50-50. People don't give the kicker enough credit for what they do because they take it for granted and see it as a given, but they also give the kicker too much of this inflated sense of the impact that they can have on the game when they're messing up. We need to remember that field goals are kind of just the halfway point between scoring a touchdown. They're meant to be a consolation prize for driving deep into your opponent's territory, even when you can't get across the goal line for a touchdown. If field goals didn't exist, we would see teams just routinely probably punting from the 30 if they were in 4th and very long, or attempting Hail Marys from 4th and goal after one bad holding penalty. So kicking is kind of taken for granted in this way. Like if it just didn't exist and we didn't have kickers, I've often seen this take from people online, we should just get rid of kicking because no team should be able to just win on a field goal. It's not actually football. We have to see it as the consolation prize for driving into the territory, and good teams don't need kickers to win and lose them games. So yeah, needless to say, fans expect kickers to make every kick now because they've become accustomed to the standard accuracy that we see from the specialized position. It wasn't always this way, but kickers in the NFL are seen as interchangeable, and they often swap teams frequently if they're average. Kickers in college are often expected to live up to these standards that we see on Sundays, but football is one of the most team-oriented sports. Kickers should take responsibility for their mistakes, and they often do, but it's unrealistic to place so much blame on one player, especially when they're on the field so infrequently. So when Ohio State lined up for that kick and the result happened, was it the kicker's fault that he missed? Yeah, it probably was, but I don't know the intricacies of the snap from the long snap or the hold by the holder, the ball placement, all of those things. I do know his team needed them to bail him out, and he couldn't. But it was a 50-yard kick. Not an easy one. There was a whole game and a whole season leading up to that moment. And it's why we love sports. We don't know what's going to happen next, whether or not the probability is on our side. Thanks for watching.